I think we have 1 minute to start, so I will just give it that 1 minute. I have the clicker. All good. Okay, welcome everybody to this afternoon. I'm sure we will be joined by other colleagues who are still making their way through the lunch queue. My name is Paul King. I'm the Chief Executive of the Built by Nature, which is a not-for-profit organisation philanthropically funded to promote the use of timber and bio-based materials as a climate and nature solution that also deliver benefits to local people. So that's why I'm here, but you don't need to hear too much more from me. Welcome to this session, Accelerating the Use of Wood and Bio-based Materials to Decarbonize Buildings. And I'm going to, hopefully, go straight to our Slido poll. So the question, as you can see, is, hopefully you've all already proficient in this. If not, pick up the QR code with your camera. Do you agree that wood and bio-based materials should play a key role in your country's plans to decarbonize buildings and conserve forests? Please vote now. Oh. I wonder if I just stand here, whether it will continue to change. Okay. Okay, that looks like that's settling down. All right. Now, all we have to do is improve on that over the course of this session, right? So the bar is already set pretty high. We've obviously got quite a lot of fans of bio-based materials in the room. So as I say, the bar is set pretty high. We'll come in a second to Mei Ling, but I just want to say a few words of introduction. Let me just start with a thought. You've already heard this several times today, I'm sure, but I'm going to say it again, but in a slightly different way. Just imagine for a moment how many houses you've been in over the course of your life. How many offices you've been in over the course of your life. How many hospitals, how many shops, how many schools, how many other public buildings have you been in? Can you imagine all of those buildings? Can you then imagine the millions of buildings you've never seen, that you've never set foot in around the world? It's a pretty mind-boggling thought. The idea that over the next 30 years, we are going to build as many buildings again as we already have on this planet. It is a mind-boggling thought. And the idea that we can do that in more or less the same way we have been doing it simply doesn't stack up. We've got to do something radically different. And as you've been hearing through the previous sessions today, including the ones in this room focused on materials, we need to do everything. Of course, we've got to look at operational efficiency. We've got to look at the whole life cycle, all of the impacts of buildings across the life cycle. Of course, we've got to also decarbonize the mainstream and the typical materials that we use, the concrete, the steel, the aluminium, the glass, and so on and so forth. But we also need to think radically differently about the sorts of materials that we use. At the most recent COP28 in Dubai, I'm sure many of you were there, we had two major announcements, of course. We had the launch of the Buildings Breakthrough, targeting near-zero buildings and resilient buildings by 2030. But we also had another important announcement from the FCLP, that's the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership. And my partner on creating this session is Peter Graham, who's here today from the Secretariat of the FCLP. And they made the announcement in favour of greening construction using sustainably sourced timber. 17 countries at that point had signed up to that, and more countries are signing up to that objective. So in this session, we are looking at these twin objectives of decarbonising our buildings, but also looking at the conservation of forests and how these two agendas can come together. Bio-based materials, be it timber or bamboo or many of the others that we'll touch on, have some extraordinary qualities. Some of you will be familiar with what people refer to as the 3 S's. These materials sequester carbon. They absorb carbon from the atmosphere as they grow. They can be substituted in many instances for much more energy-intensive materials in many different uses, but also used alongside them. And they can store carbon in buildings, locked up, if used in the right way, for many, many years. Decades, if not hundreds of years, if used in the right way. These are magic materials. If they didn't exist, we'd have to invent them. But the reality is they exist as natural carbon capture and storage technologies. So these are extraordinary things, but of course they also come with a very complex and dynamic supply chain. And many of the places, including the forests that these places come from, are under lots of stress, lots of different demands, lots of different stresses, not least those exacerbated by climate change itself. That's the context that we're going to navigate over the next hour and a quarter. The key thing is, how can we increase demand? How can we mainstream the use of timber and bio-based materials to drive the right outcomes environmentally and socially and economically, and avoid the unintended consequences of deforestation or the loss of carbon storage? That's what we're going to be grappling with. So some pretty big topics. And there's nobody better placed to kick us off than Mei-Ling Logo, who is the assistant professor from Yale, has many wonderful credentials to her name, but was also a co-author of the really momentous report that came out of UNEP Global ABC and Yale last year, looking at the future of building materials and climate. So Mei-Ling, please come and speak to us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Paul. It's an honor to be here among today's esteemed panelists and an esteemed audience to talk about the session that kicks off examining the role of renewable materials in a low-carbon future. This morning, we've heard everything from how the rapid adoption of renewable energy, coupled with electrification, to improved efficiencies all along the built sector are key shifts that we have to make in order to decarbonize. But even if we do all of this, we will not get there without removing CO2 emissions alongside this strategy. Effectively, timber and biomass constitute an incredible broad renewable materials chain that have a unique triple capacity to reduce reductions in atmospheric carbon. Firstly, through their capacities to sequester as they're growing as plants, and to eventually become carbon storage as building materials. We can elongate their lives and improve the time capture of their carbon emissions ultimately. We've built with these materials for millennia, but today we are bringing them into a 21st century building materials economy, one that is rapidly paced, deeply interconnected to a global materials value chain, where demand is at an all-time high. So this will require us to think about how we've typically grown, managed, valued, processed, and integrated them into buildings. Today's emissions that are associated with the extraction, manufacturing, transportation, processing, installation, and ultimate disposal of building materials represents 25% of emissions coming out of the building sector. And we know that this is set to double, as Paul mentioned, by 2050. Under a business as usual scenario, even with improved operational performance, where we can really reduce operational carbon, the cumulative demand for building materials to provide housing for burgeoning populations across the world, as well as this recurring demand as we retrofit buildings, is projected to essentially represent a fifth of global greenhouse emissions by 2050. So as summarized in last year's global report, Building Materials and Climate, which was done with Yale C, UNEP and Global ABC, we know that this requires a simultaneous approach across renewable and non-renewable building material streams. for very different parts of the world that have unique building material demands and renewable material resources. Renewable materials have a massive opportunity to lead across all three and play a critical role. Firstly, they have and they can continue to lead the way in terms of circular design practices, in terms of avoiding waste and building with less. Secondly, they can reconstitute a major part of our built fabric by becoming mainstream building materials with whole life carbon benefits that offer opportunities for high quality, healthy buildings and surrounding ecologies. Thirdly, they can be integrated, and they need to be part of a key decarbonization strategies of conventional building materials like cement, concrete, steel, and other materials like plastics and glass. From being used as a low carbon, non-toxic bioadhesive, replacement for fuel, supplementary cementitious materials, structural reinforcements to finishings, we know that supply chain and processing innovation in conventional materials can offer key opportunities to buy time and to experience the experience that is need for biomaterial supply chains to mature in the near term and to scale in the midterm. Relative today, the big vision for scaling bio-based materials, sorry, I'm just gonna go back. Oop. Can I go back, actually? Thank you. Thank you. Relative to today, the big vision for scaling bio-based building materials are twofold. To replenish our terrestrial carbon pool, accelerating the afforestation of forests, cropland, as well as our soil carbon storage, and to build a large carbon storage capacity in the built environment, adopting low carbon, non-toxic bio-based building materials. So coupling this renewable building material practice with regenerative forest and cropland management is a critical foundation. Timber is leading the way with continued increasing demand for sawn wood, panel and veneer products, with progress that we're seeing in sustainable forestry management, carbon accounting, innovation in timber harvesting, processing, and their resultant products, including mass timber. The timber industry is prototyping a critical path forward for its siblings in terms of biomass materials. And it is showing us why prioritizing the use of biomass as high-value products in the building industry relative to the premature combustion or downcycling of these materials is a massive opportunity to store carbon effectively at lower costs per ton. Moreover, innovations in timber and mass timber technologies to substitute, as Paul mentioned, high carbon steel and reinforced concrete materials demonstrate across local to regional studies global CO2 emissions ranging from anywhere from a reduction of 14 to 31%. Aside from timber, bamboo is a front runner due to its rapid growth between 1 to 5 years and its high carbon sequestration rates at 17 tons per carbon per hectare per year. Not only is it estimated that we have a wealth of bamboo forests around the world between 35 to 50 million hectares, but they are located in rural communities in the global south that do need to diversify their forms of economic resilience in order to deal with economic shocks as well as climate crises. Not only can bamboo be used in a host of applications, from structural applications from the foundation to beams to engineered bamboo products, but similar, they can substitute like CLT, the substitution of high carbon materials. Similar to what Chris mentioned this morning, a systematic analysis of carbon emissions of each step of the bamboo value chain, there is caution that we have to bear in mind. We can end up seeing higher carbon emissions with bio-based materials depending on the way we choose to treat, insert chemicals and glues, almost similar to a Botox approach, that force these materials to essentially do things they were not meant to do and form huge toxic problems at the end of life. Here we see in a really interesting study coming out of China through the National Science Foundation, the equivalent of laminated bamboo products being similar to that of steel. So there is a huge cautionary tale in terms of the way we go about this. Diverse streams of biomass from agricultural residues. We produce close to 140 gigatons a year. This is a renewable, fast-growing material stream. This is not also including invasive biomass from invasive species and forestry offcuts, but this is a massive supply potential. Not only does the capture and use of these biomass waste streams deal with pollution problems locally, but they can be processed at lower embodied carbon rates and adopt circular practices to reduce whole life carbon emissions. Key leading institutions modeling biomass supply chains show that supply outweighs demand across each continent, particularly in the case of bamboo and straw. But they do face increased costs for production with competing products and market demands that we'll be talking about today. And lastly, I'd like to end by talking about something we've been hearing a resounding amount of enthusiasm for, which is the partnership and cooperation that is needed all along the building material life cycle between stakeholders. So we do need policy support, and we're going to hear a ton of examples, but I'd just like to focus on three. We need to incentivize partnerships between local regenerative forestry and diverse global building materials sectors on the supply side. Policy that builds strategic capacity at a strategic scale to develop local land use, harmonize carbon accounting, incentivize biodiversity, and scale forest cropland management practices that are sustainable. We also need to think about critical education and training programs that are needed for everyone across the forestry to building material sector, to upskill and promote synergistic practices that lead to circular reuse of these materials. At the heart of this is access to reliable and transparent data across stakeholder groups and developing locally responsive bio-based building material standards, centering just practices across material value chains. This is also the key part of this, as we said, even if we get the supply side right, how do we parallel shifts on the demand side? Who actually wants these materials? And so what are the incentives to normalize the adoption and the choices of people to adopt these building materials? This is also the case that we have not necessarily focused a lot on the demand of these materials, particularly in the informal sector, and the role of proactive green certification programs in activating the adoption of these materials. Lastly, it's exciting to think about what we're going to hear today about local entrepreneurial and industrial enterprises that are driving, essentially, practices all across the value chain in terms of the reuse, recycling, and ultimately effective carbon capture of this renewable stream. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mei Ling. Thank you very much. So that is our sort of scene setter. Now we've got three segments to this session. As you've already experienced, these are fast and furious sessions. So I'd like to invite our first panelists to come up onto the stage to join us, and that is a session that's going to focus on the private sector and what companies are doing leading in this space. So perhaps Nadia. From Dr. Nadia Boschi from Lend-Lease, the head of sustainability for Italy and continental Europe. Annika Landronau, HOK Global Sustainable Design Director. On Nakagawa, President of Sumitomo Forest Group Europe. Please come and join us with Mei Ling up on the stage. And as I said, all of these tremendously experienced people have kindly agreed we're not going to give you long presentations. What we're really looking for is a range of really quite sharp insights from their different points of view. So I'd like to come first of all to Nadia from Lend-Lease. Nadia, Lend-Lease is a large multinational property investor, developer and builder. You've set some very ambitious targets to eliminate carbon emissions across the business, scopes 1, 2 and 3. Can you tell us where timber and bio-based materials fit into that picture and what some of the challenges are?
Thank you, Paul, for the invitation to give us an opportunity to share what we are doing at Lend-Lease with regard to this ambitious target, the absolute zero target, which is leading and bold. And foremost, it is a target that is about eliminating rather than offsetting. Our journey started with switching to electrification for our asset, for our construction site, and also for our development. This is the low-hanging fruit, Scope 1, Scope 2, the easy part. The biggest part of Scope 3, so I'm short. The biggest part is Scope 3, and this represents 90% of our carbon footprint. And of that, 90%, 96% comes from embodied carbon in the material we use in our development. To tackle this challenge, we are working collaboratively with our supply chain to go as fast as possible in reducing carbon. We joined Concrete Zero to create demand for zero carbon concrete through collective purchasing power. We have become a member of Responsible Steel and Steel Zero to support the drive in transforming and moving away from traditional coal, powerful steel making. But we also procure low carbon aluminum for our facade. Those are some of the examples. But all this will not be sufficient without looking at low carbon materials, as well as such as the bio-based material that we were just discussing a few minutes ago. And just to give you an example, last image is about what we are doing to accelerate the timber construction initiative. It's a project that is across the value chain, is supported by Build by Nature. We are in the second year. It's about transforming the market and facilitating the penetration of wood in new way, and I will go back in a minute. Our ambition to eliminate Scope 3 and achieve absolute zero means having clear boundaries to track across our value chain. And last year, we released version 1 of Scope 3 emission protocol. We also foster industry partnership to innovate the use of traditional materials, such as the timber. In the next slide, there is an example of what we are doing at Milano Innovation District. Milano Innovation District is built on the former site of the World Expo 2015. For some reason, some of the pavilions were left on site, so we took the opportunity to repurpose those pavilions. So what you see is the image of one of those pavilions. We retain 100% of the wood structure, that was wood structure, but the innovative part was reaching out to local industry to develop and transform process, to develop those big panels. Those big panels are made of wood and insulation. They are designed for manufactured assembly, so from a process point of view, there being decarbonization there, safer. And foremost, we are very proud that the carbon footprint that we are finalizing is about 365 kilo square meter. Very ambitious, at least for some of the markets and for Italy for sure. In closing, to go faster, we need to move forward together. We heard that over and over in this conference. And we also need a clear decarbonization roadmap that support industry transformation and investment. A system change is needed in the tools we use from private as well as private procurement specifications. Also, as you were mentioning, May, for upskilling the workforces of all levels. And we also need to have a new view about assessing risk for these new materials, as well as cost, about the perception of cost of this material. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share what we are doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you very much. Okay. Oops. There we go. So, Annika, turning to you. HOK obviously is a global architecture firm that has also set some very ambitious carbon reduction targets. What can you do to influence and promote the use of renewable bio-based materials as a strategy in decarbonising our buildings?
Thank you. We are a global multidisciplinary firm, and we do leverage the expertise from all our disciplines to set carbon commitments and achieve them, including operational performance, embodied carbon, electrification, refrigerants, horizontal infrastructure, and landscapes. We track every single project around the globe, and we report on these annually. Last year, our global portfolio achieved a 65% carbon emission reduction, and projects were forecast to reduce emissions by over 85,000 metric tons every single year those buildings will be in service. We've similarly pledged to reduce our embodied carbon in our design portfolio 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. That's structure, enclosure, and finishes. We cannot get there without the use of timber and biomaterials. We leverage our influence and expertise to influence the market, to change codes and standards, and to do this rapidly to meet the urgency of the climate crisis. Go ahead. As designers, we do advocate to our clients the use of timber and bio-based construction materials, and we are especially focused on what we consider large, high visibility, and public access projects, which may have a larger impact on rapid market transformation by influencing manufacturing, construction practice, and consumer awareness. We often advocate also for hybrid solutions, as we find an all or nothing dichotomy does not advance market acceptance of new materials as quickly as needed. Building codes have evolved to remove many of the historic barriers to the use of these materials, which inherently reduces project delivery time and therefore the costs and risks of escalation. We've also identified productive intersection with building energy codes. For example, the SeaTac airport project, we use glulam beams, which are inherently thermally resistant. It helped us meet Seattle's very stringent building enclosure requirements without thermal breaks. So this resulted in a net cost savings to the project compared to traditional structural materials. It also increases their future demountability and adaptability for the airport. Go ahead. So as one firm, we do leverage our influence over hundreds of millions of square feet of construction every year. As chair of the lead steering committee, I am leveraging our firm's expertise and experience to support the development of LEED V5 with emphasis on whole life carbon. That will be out for public comment next month, and we hope to get lots of feedback from those of you in the room. What the building industry needs really to successfully scale up rapidly the use of timber and bio-based materials, we need clear policy signals, codes that measure and limit whole life carbon, incentives to jumpstart the transformation of the market, and demonstration through high visibility, public access, and publicly financed projects. We know that the policy changes and leadership of the design industry can accelerate normalized use of timber and bio-based materials in construction.
Thank you very much. Annika. Thank you. And now, Onsan, Sumitomo has a very long and proud history in both forestry and in buildings. Why do you see timber buildings as a good investment for the future?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. First of all, as you all are aware, the reducing GHG emissions in building sector is a big challenge we are facing now. And we believe utilizing timber is one of the best ways to overcome this challenge. This is already mentioned, but I'll repeat, wood is a low carbon building material, which helps us reduce the embodied carbon of the buildings. On top of that, trees absorb carbon dioxide while they grow and store carbon internally. By utilizing harvested wood in buildings, carbon is stored for as long as the building is used. So it is safe to say that we can store carbon for a long period of time. After harvesting trees, we replant new seedlings and grow them, and they absorb more carbon dioxide. So cyclical and sustainable forest management is what we have been practicing for the last 300 years. Please look at the slide. This image is something we try to visualize what I just explained. We call it a wood cycle. It starts from forest, where we grow trees that absorb carbon dioxide, and we bring harvested wood products into the cycle of usages with the stored carbon. What we are trying to achieve throughout our value chain is to create and run more cycles or bigger cycles in this image. If we can run multiple cycles or bigger cycles of harvested wood before we release the stored carbon, it will mean that we are securing time to regrow new generations of trees. Trees absorb carbon dioxide, and we try not to release the stored carbon for as long as possible by running these wood cycles. This should contribute not only to reducing embodied carbon in building projects, but also to a low carbon or decarbonized society. And utilizing more harvested trees will simply enhance the value of wood, and it will help us operate and expand sustainable and healthy forests. Now, we see more and more investors, financial institutions, tenant companies, or individual occupants understand the value of buildings that are low carbon and have a positive impact on nature. So this is why we believe timber is a good and essential investment for the future.
Thank you very much indeed, Onsan. And we'll return to this topic of obviously looking at this from the forest perspective shortly. Just a final last word from you, Mei Ling. I mean, obviously in your introductory presentation, you talked about the fact we're not simply talking about timber, of course. We're looking at actually a huge range, potentially, of bio-based materials. Why have we got to increase investment in mainstreaming those materials, do you think?
Okay. Or maybe that?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I'll use this. Yeah, you know, I think when we look at the case of timber, especially mass timber,
Yep.
where, you know, they're leading the way, we know that that is primarily concentrated around pioneer tree species, ultimately 2 or 3, that are being used in this categorization of mass timber products. So these are mass pioneer trees. And how do we actually promote a much broader range of tree species alongside that of biomass? And biomass and timber have had historically tense relationship. The growth of supercrops and biomass has typically been associated with deforestation, and the growth of monoculture mass pioneer trees has usually eliminated, you know, the proliferation of crops. Are there sustainable ways for having multi-crop species so that we don't necessarily, when we attach the agricultural or the biomass building material life cycle to actually planting and crops, we actually might aggravate some of the negative impacts we've seen in terms of biodiversity loss, as well as a whole host of other environmental impacts, including erosion and higher CO2 emissions. And so thinking about soil health at the end of the day as the ultimate growth in terms of, you know, forest, cropland management and timber is going to be key. And that also builds, as you know, we sort of described earlier, this economic resilience, so that food, shelter are actually part of the same equation. We've seen the disastrous impacts when we prioritize one plant above all.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you, Mei Ling. Thank you to our first panelists. You've been very kind with your time. Thank you very much, and we'll move on to our next panel. Thank you. So we're going to shift our focus now. I'm going to ask our next panelists, and hopefully I can move us on. There we are. Maybe? There we go. So I'd like to invite Antoine and Simone and Kimberly to join us on the platform. So we're sort of shifting emphasis now slightly to really look at this more from a sort of government, through a government lens, really, to really highlight, you know, what is the critical role that governments have to play in incentivizing the use of timber and bio-based materials through policy and public procurement. And obviously, government operates at many different levels, and we're thinking here about different levels, be it at the national level or the city level, and so on. But to kick off, we have Antoine Caron, Deputy Director for Construction Quality at the French Ministry of Energy and the Environment. So Antoine, the French government has been a leader in setting some policy to encourage the use of timber and other bio-based materials in the context of new buildings. Can you tell us why and how it's going overall?
With pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm very glad, first of all, to be here today with you, and thank you for the invitation. Maybe if we can go to the next slide, please. Yes. So we have, of course, in France and in Europe, very ambitious climate goals to achieve. And buildings and constructions are very important contributors, and we must therefore collectively make efforts to improve their environmental impacts. Yes,
is that the right one?
The previous one, if it's possible.
There we are.
So, yeah, here is the breakdown of carbon emissions for buildings in France. As you can see in the left, 2/3 of the greenhouse gases emissions of buildings are linked to or are due to the operation of buildings. Part of them it's emission on site, and part of them it's emission on the electricity system or in a district heating system or network. And 1/3 of the greenhouse gases emission are due to the construction products themselves. And you can see also on the breakdown the repartition between the residential and the tertiary part. So having said that, we have at European level and at French level very ambitious decarbonization targets. As far as the building sector is concerned, we have set a new and innovative regulation a few years ago, which is called Environmental Regulation 2020, which addressed several goals for the improvement of energy performance of building, the adaptation of building to the future climate conditions, which will be hotter and hotter in summer, so summer comfort is taken into account, and of course the decarbonization both of the operational phase of the building and the construction phase itself. Basically, we looked at all the life cycle of the building. And we set binding targets to achieve. It is a result-oriented regulation, which means we don't say you have to put 12 centimeters insulation in your walls. We say you have to reach this level of performance, and we let the stakeholders the freedom to reach this target with the means and level that they want to choose. And this is the first regulation in France, and maybe one of the first in Europe and in the world, which takes fully into account the value represented by the carbon storage of materials, and notably in wood or in a bio-based material. Because of course an emission in 50 or 60 or 70 years has not the same impact on environment that an emission today, and we have to deal with climate change and global warming today and not in 50 years. So it's very important for us to take this into account. And this is a regulation that applies to all buildings, public buildings, private buildings, and all new buildings, of course. And furthermore, France is implementing some public policies to support the development of timber and of bio-based material in construction with an innovation fund, which is called France 2030, which finance innovation on different economic sectors, and notably in the construction and the bio-based material construction. Also, we developed a governmental certification for bio-based or biosourced buildings. It's a voluntary certification. You don't have to commit to fulfill this certification to reach the goal. But if you want to say, I can prove that my building contains a certain amount of bio-based material, you can use this certification that is realized by the French state. And last but not least, the public procurement, it plays a major role, of course. A French law of 2021 provided that by 2030, 25% of new public buildings or major renovations to public buildings should include bio-based material or low carbon materials. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's so frustrating that we're so limited for time, because I'd love to dive into some of those things in more detail, but obviously there's some tantalizing leadership examples there that I'm sure we'll follow up on. So in this gallop through our agenda, I'm now going to turn to Simone, who's the director of the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. So Simone, CNCA works with cities around the world that are aiming for carbon neutrality. I'm sure that they're juggling many different priorities. I'm sure few of them have experts in low carbon buildings, not least bio-based materials. So what can CNCA do to help, particularly at a city level?
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here, and we're very excited to be launching today our city handbook for carbon neutral buildings. As Paul mentioned, we do work with cities across the globe who have set very ambitious climate targets, often far more ambitious than national or international targets, and are therefore grappling with new and emerging policy areas and emissions to tackle that others are just starting to perhaps take on. And so we support our members, who are generally the climate leads of vanguard cities, in exploring these new policy areas. And a few years ago, our members came to us and let us know that they were beginning to grapple with embodied carbon in the built environment, and were really looking to flesh out sort of the policy approaches and levers at their disposal to try and reduce embodied emissions in the built environment. And we developed a policy framework with over 50 policy levers that cities could activate to achieve their goals. We've been working with cities in implementation since then. Specifically, we've been working with a cohort of a dozen cities in Europe to contextualize this policy framework and really try and understand what in the local and national context is feasible for cities across different geographies. And through that process, we've given technical assistance and guidance in assessing and identifying the most effective policy levers across these countries. And cities have begun working on procurement, have begun working on zoning and land use interventions, have begun working on life cycle circularity and end-of-life interventions. While they've chosen those specific policies that are most appropriate for their context, we have also placed a specific emphasis on bio-based materials. It's something that our cities are quite keen to learn more about. It's something that we've approached with the intention of leveling the playing field and removing barriers, policy and regulatory barriers, to the uptake of bio-based materials in cities. And we've been working proactively in different countries and specific cities to do that. That's taken that's evidenced the real need for capacity building and awareness raising around the use of bio-based materials, their technical performance, the health and safety considerations, procurement standards and sourcing processes, and so forth. And so we've been helping cities through that process. That's caused us to work on a number of materials that help raise awareness, Q&A, products, fact sheets, video storytelling, the successes, the sort of the intention and successes behind city efforts to really promote bio-based materials. And in the process, our cities evidence the need, the cities we've been working with evidence the need for having a resource that both compiles the technical information, but also goes ahead and kind of maps out the policy opportunities, the recommendations, the kind of considerations to really put front and center while addressing, while really updating policies and regulations. That's what this handbook is all about. We've partnered with ARUP, their Climate and Sustainability Services team in Europe, who's been a tremendous partner in the process. They have brought deep expertise and at the same time a great deal of sensibility around the needs of cities to really create a product that works for city practitioners in city climate offices. The handbook itself sets out to present about 20 materials, bio-based materials that are readily available on the market today, and to provide the information that cities need to begin to work across departments, across silos, in essentially working with climate officers, working with planning departments, permitting departments, procurement departments, and so forth, and really increasing the capacity of cities to do so. This work has been a product of a partnership with Built by Nature and the Lattice Foundation, and we're very excited to be launching it today. It's just hitting the ground today, so please take a look and let us know what you think. And we think it's particularly important at this juncture as moving out of COP28 and the Buildings Breakthrough, the FCLP, but also the CHAMP initiative that is set to give a far more prominent role to city action in reassessing and delivering the NDCs towards COP30. So this is, I think, quite timely for what we're all trying to achieve.
Thank you very much indeed, Simona. And if you haven't already, I would urge you to take advantage of the QR code. I've reviewed the book, and I think it's excellent. I learned a lot, for sure, and I'd commend it to you. So please do share it. Okay, so finally in this session, we're going to come to Kimberly Dowell. Delighted you could join us. Kimberly is the president of the American Institute of Architects. So not directly in government, but clearly your view is that architects have an important role to play in helping to inform government approaches to design and delivery of buildings. And I guess what I'm really interested in, you will have seen many and probably been involved in designing many breathtaking buildings. But can we deliver the kind of really replicable, affordable kind of buildings that we need en masse using timber and bio-based materials? Welcome your thoughts.
The answer is yes.
Okay. Very good.
So hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Dowell. It's a delight to be here with you all. I'm here today representing architects. Just to get a quick read of the room, how many architects do we have here? A handful. Okay. Hello, everyone. Let's chat afterwards. But so I'm here to really talk about the power and potential. Oh, actually, can we advance to the next slide?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so today it's a call to action, really empowering architects and government to lead climate action efforts. Of course, we're here to talk about, wood and bio-based materials and the potential of really increasing that significantly to achieve our goals. But we really need people on the ground advocating for these issues, being key advisors to our mayors and other city leaders, actually taking the handbook that you've worked on and helping to translate that information into actionable policies. And so I'll just kind of by way of introduction, I'm an architect. I actually work with Annika at HOK, so that's my day job, and then I'm also representing the American Institute of Architects as this year's president, our 100th president. And our CEO, Lakeisha Woods, has a phrase that I'll share with you today. Architects are your partners for progress. We really take pride in being systems-level thinkers and being able to really translate information that's highly technical in a way that our clients, and in this case, potentially governments, can really use to advance these goals. And one of the areas where we need great progress is obviously decarbonization of our buildings. And one of the best ways to get there, as was discussed earlier in the session, is really focusing more on timber and bio-based materials. If we can go to the next slide, please. And so what I'm advocating for here is AI's Chief Architect Initiative. Again, as advocates for building decarbonization, I strongly believe that government has a vital role to play in decarbonization, especially with increasing the usage of timber and bio-based materials. So the idea is to really empower architects to, of course, champion climate action, but as I've listed here as well, thinking about ways to advance health equity, which is very related, and also promoting affordable housing, working with transportation and infrastructure, as well as leading in the space of adaptive reuse or retrofit. And so those are some of the high-level things that I'd like for this position to really help our city leaders to do. And actually, in the U.S. context, there were many chief architects that had been very influential earlier in our history, but that sort of went away. So the idea is to really bring that back. And I know a lot of European cities and places, other places around the world have that kind of leadership. And so the idea here is really to bring that back. And if we go to the last slide here, I just wanted to provide some resources for my architects in the room, those who raised their hands earlier. These are some specific resources that you can use to take back to your company or even share it with your city government leaders or other government leaders to help you, again, translate the technical information that we are trying to navigate here at this forum and make it plain, make it accessible to those who are able to make policy decisions that will help us move the needle. And so I'll just kind of very quickly read the AI Materials Pledge, which really helps us quantify how we're advancing our goals around the materials that we use. Thinkwood.com is another sort of advocacy group that you can take a look at to understand exactly what they're doing to advance the use of again, wood and other materials. Well, this one specifically wood. The American Wood Council is another sample, woodworks.org, Architecture 2030, USGBC. Oh, I realized the numbers did not, so ignore the numbers. And then blueprintforbetter.org is another resource through AI that kind of helps provide resources. So that's, if you go to the next slide, I will just say thank you for listening, and look forward to any final questions that you have for us.
Kimberly, thank you very much indeed. So look, thank you all. I'm afraid, you know, any one of these segments of this session could easily fill an hour and a quarter on their own. Unfortunately, I've got to keep going. So I'm going to thank you all, and I'm going to come to our final panel session to keep us on track. So thank you all again.
Thanks.
So, gosh, this really is a sprint, isn't it? So we've heard the perspective of business and how these materials figure in the context of decarbonising buildings and building portfolios and some of the challenges. We've heard a bit of a perspective there in terms of government, what government can do to lead in terms of policy and public procurement, and some obviously proposals, suggestions and resources for people in those positions. Our last part of this discussion is going to really sort of come to kind of wrap this thing together in terms of what can we achieve through the use of bio-based materials, including timber, and looking at this holistically, looking at this from the point of view of, you know, can we achieve a real win-win here between the future of our forests and natural places and our cities? That's the goal. If we can achieve an outcome that benefits both, then we're all much happier and healthier for it. But that's the big challenge. So I'm delighted that we're joined by Lisa here from WWF, from Frederick, the Secretary General of the Federation of Hemp Organisations, and also from Ewald from the FAO, Deputy Director of Forest Division, FAO. So as I say, what we're looking at here is how do we achieve this real win-win. So I'm going to, again, come to them each in turn. I'm going to come to Ewald first. Ewald, can the use of timber for buildings really provide a win-win for our forests and cities? And what kind of safeguards are required if we're to avoid the unintended consequences and really get the outcomes that we're looking for? Your thoughts?
$1 million question,
Yeah.
I guess. Well, one of the things that I've heard all these days is there is a lot of potential for building with wood. The question is, yes, do we have enough? And how do we avoid these consequences that you said? In FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, that's an intergovernmental organization that tries exactly to support countries in balancing the issue of the need for forest protection at the same time as the issue of using forests in a good way. And that, in a way, implies that you have to manage and reduce deforestation, you have to restore land and plant trees, and you have to make sure that these products are used in a sustainable way. And some of those products end up in buildings, because how we are able to green our cities will determine whether we are living on a happy planet with happy people in a green economy. That's, I think, what we want. If we look at today's situation, we use around 4 billion cubic meters of wood per year. That is industrial round wood and wood fuel. 4 billion. Now, as we progress with economic development and as we grow as a planet with people, we expect that by 2050 we will need another billion in terms of material. Another billion, that is 25% within 25 years. That's quite a bit of material. And the big question I think that you're asking is, are we able to make that? We at FAO, we think yes. We believe that there are two major points here. One is the material that we use currently, half of it is basically burnt at site or close to the site. Very short term, very low value added. So there is a lot of value adding that you can bring that makes forests and wood more valuable. And you have a lot of efficiency loss currently in the industries. Maybe not so much in the northern industries, but a lot in the south. There's a lot of technology push that you can do to have efficiency gains. That helps. But the real game changer is if we look at how much land we have that is degraded. It's 2.2 billion hectares of degraded lands. And we have countries on the planet that have pledged to restore about 1 billion hectares of land. That is where a lot of the thinking needs to go, because that is where resources can grow, and if they grow in the right way, then we have a win-win situation. 1 billion hectares of land. Okay, well, we calculated with a bioeconomy scenario how much more you would need in terms of adding green buildings and adding other biomaterials from forests, and we came to an area that we would need from these 2.2 billion with intensive plantations of about 33 million hectares. Out of the 2.2 billion, 33 million hectares doesn't sound like a lot. Actually, in terms of area, it is. But this is high, intensively managed forests, and that's maybe not what we want from a climate resilience point of view, from a biodiversity point of view, and from a local context and local benefits point of view, local jobs, local value chains. So we are actually looking for a larger area, but it's still maybe in the 100 million compared to 1 billion of hectares that we have pledges by government, formal pledges, to restore. And these planted forests and planted trees in agricultural landscapes, agroforestry, other means, that in a way is really the future if we want to balance out these things. Currently, these are 7% of the area of the planet on forests, 7. And these 7% produce 50% of the industrial roundwood supply. So we have an agriculture that is actually quite monoculture, and we don't necessarily have a problem with that. If we want to have a better biodiverse economy, I think it's possible if we just shift a little bit of how we produce and how we use this type of stuff. So I think, yes, there is a lot to do, we all know that, but there is a chance. We in FAO, we work quite a bit in terms of bridging between forests and sustainable use, and we are in this space, especially having dialogues with governments. And we see maybe 3 or 4 elements that we put a lot of emphasis on in our support to governments and intergovernmental processes. One is data. It came up very often. If you screen the literature, you will find so many conflicting data that it's quite hard to really understand what is happening. And sharing this data and improving is really important. And then communicating to consumers the demand, to citizens, that actually it is possible with nature-based solutions. I think that's one big area. The other one is really supporting, I guess, guys like you who are pioneers, innovators who have momentum, who push for innovative solutions. That needs incentives as much as possible, and there is a strong win-win with governments, because governments could, and are there often, but not always, to remove barriers. We have heard about codes, we have heard about capacities, we have heard about a lot of other things on different levels. And then there is the finance aspect. A lot of the pioneers need the governments to just reduce the risk of going in and try and risk failing. So that's the second area where we see quite a lot is happening, and quite a lot more needs to happen. And the third one is basically the simple safeguards. The safeguards on the environmental, social, environmental in terms of biodiversity, in terms of climate, and social safeguards. And then have systems that assure you as a consumer or as a constructing company that this is really going in the right direction. You get the wood that you want. That's all fine. I think it's largely in place, and I'm coming to my end. In many of the developing countries, we see there is interest in all of this, but compared to the developed countries, there is a long way to go. So I would hope and plead that given that 80% of the buildings that come up in the next 2 decades are going to be constructed in the Global South, there is a momentum that is starting in the Global South that needs a lot of attention to work with, to really make this change a global change. There is a lot to learn and to connect, and I'm happy that we have this opportunity. And certainly FAO is also there to work with these innovative solutions drivers, because this is what is needed. So thank you very much for inviting me here and to share these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iwo. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to Lisa from WWF. Lisa, WWF is obviously known around the world as a leading conservation organisation focused on the conservation of forests and biodiversity, as well as obviously tackling climate change. But do you support the sustainable use of timber for construction, and if so, under what circumstances? Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So I'm Lisa King, and I work with WWF, and I think maybe to answer a question, why is WWF here? We have a history of working with a lot of companies, cities, on that whole question of sourcing sustainably. I think using timber seems like a good idea, but we really want to push this whole idea of really how do we source sustainably. Today, we still have a lot of issues of unsustainable forest management, illegal logging. So that's the big question as we there's a lot of momentum for biomaterials is how do we do this in a sustainable way? How do we take into account forest harvesting that's beneficial for biodiversity, that's beneficial for people and also for climate? And I think Mei Ling already touched on a lot of those aspects. When we're talking about this shift, not forgetting to avoid within timber. We get excited about timber, but how do we also, do light construction, other kinds of uses of timber? And I think there was a slide. I think from a WWF perspective, we're also looking at the big picture, that there's a lot of different uses, a lot of demand for timber. We have some colleagues in Germany that did a study recently looking at what is a sustainable amount of timber to be produced in the world. So we had a number around 3 billion. I mean, that can be debated and refined. But the big point is that we have to be careful, what are the different uses? Construction is an interesting one to us, I think, because it provides an avenue for a more sort of noble use of timber rather than just burning it, that also contributes to forest conservation, that can contribute to these targets on forest restoration. So I think that from a WWF perspective, it is a really interesting industry to invest in. But then the final point, I think, is also being aware of the need to track and monitor the timber use we have. What are these limits globally? I think especially as climate change is already starting to affect forests, we're already seeing changes in the supply of forestry, more differences, diseases, different things are affecting our supply. So how do we take this into account so that we can truly have sustainable sourcing of timber for this industry going forward?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, can I come on to Jaime from Costa Rica? Jaime, you're the president of the Forest Chamber of Costa Rica. Can you tell us how does Costa Rica's approach to sustainable forest management and the use of timber for construction contribute to its socio-economic and environmental goals?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thanks for the audience to be here. Let me tell you a little story, just a little. Costa Rica stopped deforestation between 1995 and the year 2010 around. How that comes? It's because we changed the law. And we changed the forest law when we just got an agreement between private sector, government, communities, and environmental, people who just worry about biodiversity. So we stopped deforestation. Today, we have a negative deforestation in Costa Rica. We're very different from other countries? Yes. We did a lot of changes? Yes. Especially because we create funds, money from taxes, from consumption of fuels and oils and etc., even today. So the government pays people who takes consideration on biodiversity and on carbon sequestration. Is the only country today that has these internal funds. We call the environmental services payment. It is working. The private sector agrees with the tax, agrees with the with the knowledge, and especially we agreed on special regulation how to manage the forest. So today in Costa Rica, we have natural forest, has been harvested. We have also a secondary forest that we just recovered from the past, that we're planning to harvest in the next year. And we also have reforestation at the same time. And we create a special brand for Costa Rica. We call that Costa Rica Essential. So you travel to Costa Rica, the first logo that you're gonna look at will be this Costa Rica Essential. What that means, this is sustainable Costa Rica. And the private sector got involved in this. We were not fall apart on that. We were part of the policy and the changes as well as today. On the other hand, we have community investment. So the private sector agrees to invest outside the main cities and to work with the forests It was to sustain the regular forest, the natural one, and the reforestation as well. So I think that was a kind of solution. It takes some time, yes, it takes some time, but we just got the goals the way we expect. Now, next steps. Nothing is forever. We have to develop, new perspective on the industrial side in order to produce better fiber for construction purposes. We need to change the way the procurement from the government. We think that we can build all our low-income houses from forests, sustainable managed today, but we need to act rapidly. Why? Because we don't have time. Even though from the engineering and architect sector, I'm a civil engineer, by the way. We're gonna create a new code, the code for climate change. So we're gonna add the value of every building related to the footprint, to the carbon footprint. And we're gonna develop a special regulation in that sense. I think those are the main goals. There are more goals than that, but I think for the rest of today's, I'm gonna stop here because if you have any question, don't hesitate. And on the other way, if you don't trust me, go to Costa Rica. You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jaime. That's fantastic. Okay, so our last panelist here is Frederick, who is the Secretary General of the Federation of International Hemp Organizations. So again, reminding us, we're not just talking about timber, we're talking about a range of different materials. Tell us a bit about hemp, a very new, old material, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And it's no wonder that I'm the last one to speak because this plant is kind of a miracle. So it's the solution that you're looking for. No, just to tell you a little bit the history of hemp. Before the Second World War, it was one of the most cultivated crop in the world, and it's one of the most ancient crop domesticated by humankind. But the chemical industry killed the hemp sector in the 20th century because a lot of the applications that were used with hemp were replaced by nylon and plastic and other chemical materials. But now we are rediscovering hemp, thanks to promoters and believers of this plant. And hemp has many potentialities. It is a carbon stock, like other plants we saw earlier today. And we can go to the next slide, maybe.
Absolutely.
And it's a forest that grows in 3 to 6 months. So I don't know if you have ever seen a field of hemp, but it grows up to 3-4 meters high in 3 to 6 months. So it's a new forest that is growing very fast, and in fact the capacity of hemp to store carbon is quite extraordinary. And when it's used for hempcrete or materials, building materials, then of course it's very interesting. Today there are many different materials that have been developed. I have some here, some samples. We can do hempcrete, we can do plastic, we can do cardboard, and many others. If you want to see them, you can go on the Global ABC booth, and there are some samples there. But what I wanted to say is that we still need to work on many how can I say bad ideas about hemp. Of course, hemp is a cousin with cannabis, so in many countries it's still regulated as a narcotic plant, which is completely wrong, because of course industrial hemp is not at all a narcotic. France is a pioneer in cultivating hemp and promoting hemp, so thank you for that. But also China and Canada and other countries. And now there's a big possibility for hemp to be developed in developing countries because it's a plant that can be processed locally and transformed locally. So it creates also job and activities for farmers and for industrials. But there are messages that we wanted to pass on to the international community. The first one, of course, is to remove the legislative barriers that still exist in many countries. Today, hemp is authorized in 50 countries out of 200, so there's still some progress to make. There's a need also to support the supply chain because the supply chain is quite difficult at the moment between the growth of the plant and the transformation. So there's a need also for investment to develop the transformation of hemp. We need to work with the United Nations to remove hemp from the 1961 Narcotic Convention, but that's something very technical. I won't go into that today. We also favor for developing countries the possibility to create cooperative system. France knows that very well because they are working in cooperative system for a long time. But we believe that in developing countries like in Africa or Latin America or even Southeast Asia, working in cooperative system will help the sector to develop better. Also, we call for programs to develop research programs, and that's something that we want to do with FAO in particular. So we are very happy to be here with them. And also, there's one element that is very important, is affordable construction. Hemp can be used, and if we go to the previous slide, you see some examples of buildings. But some countries in Africa and the African Union has a big programs of building affordable housing, and hemp is something that can be used in affordable housing, but we still need investors and support from development banks and partners to do that. And I'm here, I want to mention them, with colleagues from companies that are invested in hemp, Just Biofiber and Natural Fiber Technologies. So you can meet them during the forum. And so join us and make sure that you can go on our website and support us, and we'll be very happy. Thank you very much,
Frederick. Thank you very much indeed, Frederick. Thank you to all of our panelists here. It just remains for me to sort of round up this session, really. As I've said a couple of times, that was quite a gallop. The last hour and a quarter has sort of flown by. We've literally sort of toured the world and also begun to tour the world of bio-based materials. And there's a lot there, and it would have been lovely to spend a bit more time unpacking those topics. But I hope that we can sort of stay in touch. And I want to say a bit more about that in just a second. I mean, just to recap, you know, through this session, you've heard from some leading businesses who are really grappling with how they can decarbonize their buildings. And yes, they will be driven to look at ways to decarbonize concrete and steel and aluminium and glass and other materials, but increasingly they've got to supplement those materials with obviously bio-based renewable materials as well. We've heard from some leading government action, not least our host, the French government here, showing some really innovative approaches both to policy making but also applying these principles to public procurement and really showing leadership there. And that's so important because, as we know, that the industry is so dominated by a relatively small palette of materials. We really do need to create opportunities to give these new entrants, many of them very old materials, of course, but a bit of a leg up to get a level playing field on which we can really access and source these materials on an equitable and affordable basis at the scale that perhaps we can. So that's critical. But we've also heard from leading intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations as well. And as we said at the beginning, you know, while there are huge opportunities here to potentially help decarbonize our buildings, and also, if done in the right way, to actually drive investment in the right sort of forest management and the right sort of reforestation programs, there are inherent risks of getting this wrong. And I think that's why it's so important that actually we begin to extend our community. There is already a very, very lively community of actors in this space. In addition to the organisations you've seen on the platform this afternoon, there are many others in the audience here. Bauhaus Earth, pilot projects are just two I can spot immediately. Obviously work with the FCLP, the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership. And we are committed to continue to build an alliance across this value chain, all the way from the forest to the buildings. And we really want to work with people over the coming months to develop a set of principles around making sure that actually increasing demand in this space does drive the right outcomes and avoids the unintended consequences. So that's really a thought I want to leave you with. There is a document already, which is a first draft, which is called Securing the Future of Our Forests and Cities, that was co-authored by Pilot Projects, Bauhaus, and Built by Nature. We're very keen to expand on that, to develop that, and to get other organisations involved in developing these principles. So watch this space, and we will reach out to you. But please do reach out to us if you'd like to be involved in that conversation. As I say, because ultimately that is about driving the right outcomes for our climate, for our forests, and for local communities. And the final thing I think I'm going to do is go to our, if it's still working, to our final poll. Is it going to be there? Can we go to our final poll? I don't know if we can or not. It doesn't seem to want to come up. Have we got the final poll? No? All right, we might have to go for a show of hands. Who thinks that bio-based materials and timber should be part of your country's plans to decarbonize buildings and conserve forests? Please show us your hand. Thank you very much. I think that's a definite improvement on where we began at the beginning of the session. Thank you all very much. Thank you.